A missionary founder is someone that is not just doing this to make a ton of money, but has something quite personal at stake in terms of the success of this business and some change that they want to see in the world. I'll give you a small example of this. We have a recent investment into this company called Above Health. It's run by this great guy named Matt Truby. So what Matt does is he's creating like a whole sweat of AI diagnostics. And actually, the reason why we are so inspired to invest is that he's got this really great young daughter who suffers from severe allergies. And he's building these devices largely for her, and realized that in the course of building this like diagnostic platform, it can serve so many other families with kids or adults with severe allergies too. He's like the perfect missionary founder. What's at stake is actually not just money, but he wants to save women, men, daughters, sons, just like his daughter. And how can you bet against someone who is trying to serve the person that they love most in their life? And that is really the high bar that I'm hoping to see in every single one of our founders.
Eric Bahn, welcome to Funded. Really excited to get into it with you here today.
Alex, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm excited to speak with you as well.
All right, so I'd like to start at the beginning of your startup journey and talk about how that has informed your experience as a VC. So you were in the trenches in the late 2000s building Beat The GMAT, which ultimately was acquired. How did that experience shape your perspective on what it takes to build a generational company?
Yeah, so going back even a few years before that, so I went to college in California and then had a great time. I actually had too much of a great time. So by my senior year, I was sort of looking at my track record. I had a tepid GPA, didn't do a single club. So never, like, I was a spoiled little brat, so I never did any summer work. And, spend most of my time playing video games, smoking weed, all the good things that you get to do in college. And then senior year comes around and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, what am I going to do? I don't think I'm very employable here. And then, so of course I call my mom because, I didn't have any maturity. And I was like, Mom, what am I going to do? And then no joke, in her like broken Korean American English, she said, Eric, you are too dumb to be a doctor or a lawyer, but maybe you should think about business. And so like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, okay, sure. And like, she's like, there's a school for business. It's called business school. Look into it. And that was the accidental trigger to several decades of entrepreneurship. So what happened with Beat The GMAT is began as a study blog. I recorded on Blogspot my daily routine for preparing for the GMAT test, which is the entrance exam for getting into business school. One superpower I do possess is I'm very good at standardized tests and standardized test preparation. So completely worthless skill in most regards. But in this case, that blog ended up becoming a viral sensation back in 2005. And then over the course of the next few years, I was able to find a job, by the way. I was sort of bootstrapping this thing on the side for 3.5 years. Eventually, that blog turned into a discussion forum. And then I went full time on it in 2008. And it grew into eventually becoming a data business where I was getting 95% of MBA applicants on our platform, sharing their data in advance of their applications. I would sell these data anonymized to business schools for $100,000 a year. It was a really scaled company that we were able to bootstrap over the course of 7 years. Got acquired. I stayed for 2 more years. So it was in total a 9-year project, which I think was one of the best crash courses of graduate school education of teaching me how to become an entrepreneur for the rest of my career.
Wow. Did you end up actually going to business school, or did your experience studying for the GMAT launch you into this business and you got the degree from the School of Entrepreneurship instead?
Yeah, ironically, no one who ever worked at Beat The GMAT, and it was a small team, under 12 people at its peak, none of us went to business school. I got in and then I asked to defer. And I remember emailing the head of admissions of that school saying like, hey, I just need like 1 or 2 more years to try to play out this company. And his response was awesome. It was like, I look forward to seeing your application again in the future. It was like a complete, like, we're not going to do that. So no. And I think I would have enjoyed it, but it just never was the right time to do something like that. And at the end of the day, I'm a kinesthetic tactile learner, which means I have to learn by doing. I can't learn by reading or writing. I never have been very good at that.
That's so interesting. So what were the handful of lessons that stuck with you from your 9 years building Beat the GMAT that you use when you're working with founders today?
I think a lot of it was a crash course on the power of sales. So in the beginning of Beat the GMAT and the beginning of my founder journey, I was feeling a little put off by the idea of sales, right? Because sales for me was this transactional thing, which was like, I'm trying to buy a car off of Alex. We're positionally bargaining against each other. He wants like $12,000. I want $8,000. And we're just throwing numbers at each other. I thought that was like what sales and transactions were. Later, though, I realized that sales is entirely something different and actually has way more consequence to the work that I get to do today. So first of all, sales is a really good signal when it comes to understanding product market fit. I think this is actually a mistake that a lot of founders make is they build a little bit too quickly before they even validate the market, talk to a single customer and so forth. So it's actually a critical component in the pipeline of building good product. That's part one. Part two is that sales isn't a transactional thing. I think a good salesperson is all about trying to understand like what is it that Alex is trying to build in his own world, his own company, his own life, and is there actually a fit? And if there's not a fit, then I think a good salesperson should just preemptively say like, hey, we shouldn't work together because it's not a good priority for you right now. Or if it is a good fit, after understanding, I think, a little bit more about the person you're trying to work with, then I think like it comes to just more of like an alignment. It's not like this butting heads thing. It's just like we are all going to win together by doing this thing together. And then the last thing I learned about sales, and this is really relevant for me at Hustle Fund, is that it's not just about the transaction, making the money, the deal, but it's also about really great storytelling and empathy. Right. And a good sale isn't always about making the deal. It could be about just like selling Alex on joining my company, saying like, hey, man, you should leave your cushy job right now because I think this is where our visions align. Right. It's just something that you have to practice every day. And it doesn't usually even entail money or making money. It's just like getting people excited about the vision and telling the story in the right way. And that was, I think, an invaluable lesson that I got out of that first company.
Yeah, so much of being the leader of a startup is at its core sales, over and above trying to bring in new deals. Like you said, you're trying to sell recruits on joining. You're constantly selling your team who's there on the vision, trying to get them excited about it, get everyone aligned, trying to sell partners on why you are a good long-term fit for, collaborations and things like that. I definitely underestimated the extent to which I would be spending my time selling when I started at Air CFO. I'm curious to hear, it sounds like you were very ahead of your time when it comes to a trend that has gained a lot of traction recently around founder-led sales and sort of bootstrapping demand with content. Do you have any advice for founders who are in the early stages today, how they can use content creation to validate their idea and demonstrate initial traction?
Something that I say to our founders all the time is, even though they may be building really cool technology or really cool product, I tell them as early as possible that they should view their work as building as much a media business as they are in building a product company or a services company. And here's what I mean by that. We're kind of entering an era, I guess it's always existed, but now it's more named and pronounced, especially today in today's builders, which is going direct to your own followers and having a community around you presents an incredible moat. A common narrative that I'm actually hearing right now, relevant to September 2025 as of this recording, amongst VCs, is a lot of confusion as to what AI businesses are actually going to be defensible or not. You can argue that there's going to be a gazillion AI tutors or like a gazillion voice notation, dictation tools, and so forth. And it's all happening right now. But I think those that are consistently able to succeed, or at least have a good chance of succeeding, are those who also invest into building a community around themselves. All this phenomenon also applies to venture capital. There are thousands and thousands of venture capital firms. Maybe we're approaching even 10,000 plus at this point. So just having money and saying, hey, Alex, I have money, come take it, isn't quite a differentiator anymore. being able to have the extended community that we can use and leverage in service of our founders is though. So for example, in our newsletters businesses and social media business, we reach about 500,000 founders a month now. And that turns into a great distribution channel for us to begin promoting your company through our channels for free to drive your first revenue, right? We have a huge angel investor community of 2,500 members called Angel Squad. This is what we are using to serve as the primary mentors that we find from this diverse community into our portfolio as well to provide tactical help and so forth. That's what we're doing. And in addition to that too is, I think with VC, it's so monotonous. Like if you were to just go to a bunch of websites of VC firms, bring up like 20 of them, and then just scan through them, you're not going to be able to tell which one's which. They all say the same damn thing, right? So content is a really good way of sort of spoon feeding, I think, your own unique voice. In our case, we are an authentically irreverent and not taking ourselves too seriously team, but take the work seriously. And we have a simple voice guide, actually, that we employed in any content that we provide that is authentic to us, that begins to differentiate us. So I'll train you on it right now. Imagine, Alex, you are a 15-year-old girl who is super sarcastic, but a closet idealist. Okay, I'll say it again. 15-year-old girl, super sarcastic, closet idealist. You might be looking at a 43-year-old Korean American dude right now, but I am that 15-year-old girl, as in every single one of our teammates. And all of the content that we produce, videos, blogs, whatever it is, has to pass that filter because it's authentic to us. And as a result, it really creates an interesting selection bias of kind of people who get us, the founders and our LPs and so forth. And that's been a huge source of joy for our work.
That's amazing. That is probably the best brand voice description I've heard from a startup or VC. So I really like that. It's also probably an interesting way to set context with ChatGPT starting conversations as well. I really like the video that you had on your website, and that is also on your LinkedIn as a pinned post, with the video sharing why founders should take money from Hustle Fund and what differentiates you from the thousands of other VCs out there. And just as a quick aside, I totally agree with your assessment. Looking at websites of your standard VC firms, it's really hard to tell them apart. We actually built a tool internally at Air CFO called our VC Matchmaker, where we've pulled data on 50,000 funding rounds and built profiles of each VC so that we can tell our clients, hey, here's this VC's investing track record. And then we have them put in their information, that we have the founders put in their information, and we match them up based on the VC's actual investment strategy. Because it's a pretty futile assignment to try to determine if a VC is a good fit just based on looking at their website. But putting that to the side, you talk about the three ways that you differentiate yourself, and you've got your speed to decision, the education, the resources that you've put together, and then the network that you've created through all these flywheels with Hustle Fund, the media company. What would you say are the characteristics of the founders who resonate most deeply with that pitch and who end up being the best fit for partnering with Hustle Fund as they're raising a round?
In 70% of the cases across our portfolio of 620 companies over the last 8 years, we're the very first investor in 70%, right? So like it's even before mom and dad, it's a huge privilege to be an early believer in the truest sense. And it tends to self-select for a certain kind of founder. So we really like, in 80% of cases, first-time founders. So first-time founders are more risky, for sure, because they lack a lot of mental models of what being a great founder looks like. Failure rate is ostensibly a little bit higher in that sense, but we like being we like supporting those first believers because they tend to be the most audacious. I think naivete also is a little bit of an advantage as well. Looking back at some of the companies that I've built, I've done 5 startups at this point. if I had known what I had known now about those businesses, I'm not sure I would have gotten started. So some of that like early audacity is highly appealing and producing some surprising results. And of course, in a venture capital model, we do get rewarded for that, because if you're taking a risk on an earlier founder, first time, so forth, valuations tend to be a little bit lower. And that's something that we're really sensitive to in our funds model. So we like first time founders. We look at all things software. So generalist fund, we don't say that we have like a specific category of industries or whatever that we're trying to invest in, but we do tend to like B2B business models. Things like that require like selling a product at a very high ACV, average order value or whatever it is going to be. That's stuff that we quite like. But there's sort of like a last thing here too, which is kind of true to the brand, which is we have a no asshole rule. So what does that mean? It's just like we want to be able to sense that there's high emotional intelligence in that individual. For me, that translates to that they're quite coachable. That if we provide some feedback to them, they're not going to put a lot of ego ahead of listening. That it feels like there's a really strong sense of communication, but this also works both ways. That they're also open to communicating back how they're feeling or asking things preemptively and early. So long as I think those criteria are there, that's a very good foundation for a 10-year plus relationship with that founder. It's pretty basic, but you'll be surprised how few founders can actually meet that threshold.
Yeah, that's a really vivid picture of who your ICP is when it comes to the founder or the founding team. You have mentioned this phrase hilariously, early startups, a couple of times. I'm interested to learn. So once the founder has checked the boxes from a personality and culture fit standpoint, what are some of the other signals that you look for when a company has very little in the way of financial traction to show that might, separate them as a great investment candidate for the first money in it hustle?
So I'm going to train you, Alex, as well as your audience on how to join the investment team and make those decisions on the first checks. So we see about 1,000 to 1,500 deals per month. And on average, we'll write an initial $150,000 investment into 7 teams. The 7 investments are done on a champion model, which means that anyone on the investment team is allowed to write that $150,000 check without consulting anyone else on the team. It's a completely independent check. And the reason why we do that for the first check, at least, and we don't do that for the second check. Second check is pure consensus, the double down check. The first check is more about trying to invite contrarian and right ideas. Because what we found in our history is that sometimes Alex will invest in a company, I'm like, I hate this thing, or vice versa. It's the controversial ones are the ones that tend to be the outliers. Like later, then it'll be like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe Alex saw this and caught it, because like now it's going through the roof. Like every one of our best companies have fit this kind of criteria, contrarian and right. Now,
could you give an example of a idea or a startup that may have only had one champion in the earliest days that ended up becoming a massive success for the fund?
Yeah, I'll take my example. One of my favorite founders I ever worked with is also a Texas native. Her name is Tara Viswanathan. Fun fact, we were talking about Scott Hickel, who's been a guest and friend of this show before. He's running a great company called Throne. Scott and Tara were actually neighbors in West Texas. So this small world right there. Anyway, Tara, I think, is one of the most brilliant founders I've ever worked with. And I'm going to continue to back every company that she does for the rest of her life. In the beginning, when we wrote our check into Tara, she wanted to create something in the holistic medicine space. So holistic medicine is something that I have recently in the last 10 years become a really true believer of. There's this idea that instead of like the Western medicine world of like, you have all these specialists that are trying to treat like heart disease or a lung disease and so forth. Holistic medicine people kind of look at the whole body to try to understand the root cause of like, why is it that you're having like heart issues or lung issues and so forth? Because it could be different parts of your body that are sort of contributing to this kind of stuff. And it was also called root cause medicine often. So she wanted to build something in the root cause medicine space. At first, it was something like social networks for people who have like very specific kinds of conditions to get together. She called them Rupa circles. Her company's called Rupa Health. And we invested because I was just like, this person is so compelling. Like, I like the thesis that she has of trying to solve something here. Don't really love the idea, but I'm very curious to understand how she hustles. All right. So taking a step back here, We have a really simple thesis at Hustle Fund. We think that the very best leading indicator of success they can find in teams, even at the earliest stages of company formation, is hustle, which we define as great execution meets high velocity. So teams that are highly experimental, oriented towards measurement, are constantly improving the throughput of what they can ship and deliver each week, each month, each year, we think are going to grind out great businesses over time. And Tara is a perfect manifestation of this. So I told my teammates we're investing in Tara's company, and all of them were just like, social networks for people with chronic illnesses, there's no business here. And I was like, I agree, but she seems to be the kind of person who's going to find a path to turning this into a really huge business. Over the course of 18 months of working with her, I've never actually seen someone with so much ability to ship within a given week. She was calling hundreds of doctors each week, outlining experiments on a week-to-week basis of what she was trying to discover. And then just over the course of time, just was pivoting in micro ways, not macro ways, into something that eventually became a best-in-class lab order infrastructure for hospitals and clinics, not just for root cause, but actually Western clinics too. And then that thing scaled like a monster. Right before the acquisition last year, which she sold for a huge sum, she was doing something like $1 billion a month in GMV, right? So for me, it wasn't about so much that this is a team that has like all the perfect answers. You know, our rubric for what we test for when we write the check is team, problem, solution, market, traction. Those are the 5 criteria that we're trying to test for and understand. And only 0.7% of those companies that we speak with each month will actually get investment from us after giving us their kind of like 5 areas. These are mostly theories at this point. Tara was actually missing some of these even. Like, she didn't have like a really great solution in my view, but her other criteria, especially on like the team and the problem she's trying to solve, the market and so forth, like it was so compelling that we are curious enough to understand how she hustles. So just to end note, like our investment process here, we start with a first check, $150,000, relatively quick, within 1 to 2 meetings. We then work with the team on a growth project, usually around 8 weeks, but it can extend a little bit longer. That's when we can get a much better sense of understanding how the team works and hustles and so forth. And then in a subset of cases thereafter, after we write that first check and run the growth project, in that subset, we realize that like founder Tara is an incredible, true hustler in a market that still gets us quite excited. And that's when we'll double down with a much larger check into her company. So I'll pause there. That's a little bit about us, the investment process, and a case study in Tara, one of the best founders I've ever worked with.
That's a great story and a really interesting investment process as well. I'd be curious to understand what the growth projects tend to look like and how you evaluate the success or failure of those projects to determine whether you are going to be able to get consensus around your double down investment.
You know, in the beginning of Hustle Fund, this is in 2017 when we got started, we had a thesis that one of the best indicators of success is actually code output. So we were looking at a lot of core metrics, especially around how much code are you shipping per week, to see whether this is a reliable source for tracking who's breaking out and so forth. And it turned out that you can't do that reliably. So, for example, if you're building an airplane company, Alex, and I'm building like a new CRM, you're checking in very different kinds of things. The cadence of speed is quite different. And it actually might even be inappropriate for you to be measuring yourself on code. I'll tell you a quick story on this. One of our early investments is in Boom Supersonic, the next generation supersonic commercial aircraft run by Blake Scholl. And the first thing that he did, one of the first things, even before he really began to build the engineering behind this, was sell the product. He got something like 9 billion in pre-orders, like almost like in the first year or two, even before he actually had real groundwork for building the product itself, right? He did a lot of customer validation and that worked. So maybe sales is like a better measure for him. So to answer your question, we don't dictate what the growth metric is. The founder always has to dictate it. They have to tell us like, what is the most important metric you're measuring right now and why? And we will try to design a growth sprint to try to push that metric together. So a typical growth project is we just invested in Alex. He and I get together and talk about his growth goals. We'll usually enroll him in Redwood School, which is our private school on customer acquisition and sales. It's only 45 minutes a week. It's on a almost quarterly basis now. But more importantly, we'll then pair him up with 2 mentors who are growth experts in his industry drawn from our community. So as a GP like myself and 2 mentors and Alex, we'll try to work with you week to week to try to push the growth metric that you care about most. And it doesn't matter that you're maybe focused on sales, founder Eric might be focused on coding or product development or whatever. We have seen enough data at this point where, as someone who is unusually good about shipping and learning and iterating, is usually producing, I think, the right kinds of culture, or I guess the right kinds of cycles of development to eventually figure it out and grow into a really big business. And in the case of Rupa Health, she was so focused on customer acquisition and customer discovery that it was clear to us that even though she didn't have the answers yet, she was going to get there, and which is why we doubled down well before she had created her final product. And then we continued to invest even until she got acquired.
I really love that approach. There's so many unknowns when you're the first check-in. And at a very core level, you're betting on the founder just being able to feel their way through kind of like the idea maze and figure things out. And I assume you have to be comfortable with a founder ending up in a very different place than where they started when they initially took the money from you. So that's really awesome. And I really like the growth experiment framework as well. It's a very tangible way that you can add value as an early stage VC, as opposed to the more nebulous offers that other investors might make. I'd love to take a small step back within the fundraise cycle and talk about the pitches that you're reviewing. So you receive over 1,000 pitches a month, and you end up whittling that down to 7 initial investments on average. What do you believe are the most critical elements of a successful pitch? You talked about those 5 buckets, and I guess maybe you could talk about it through the lens of like, what percentage weight does each bucket tend to hold, or whatever direction you want to take that prompt.
One of the things I really like about working at Hustle Fund is if you were to ask this question to my 3 other investment team colleagues, you're going to get 3 different kinds of results, or 4 different kinds of results, including me. All of us have highly different kinds of weightings when it comes to the team problem, solution, market, and traction. For example, Elizabeth, my co-founder, she really likes to focus a lot on market and understanding, like, is this the right time for this business to happen and so forth. I don't really think about that so much. I do talk a little bit more about traction. Not so much that like founder Alex has like millions in revenue yet. It's almost never the case. But like, what are his strong opinions of like the customer acquisition channels that he's going to go after, and trying to understand the rationale behind that. Like, I spend more time than Elizabeth does on that. Haley, Sheehan, my 2 other investors on my team, they have different kinds of answers. So in my case, 70 to 80% of it is team. That's what I care about the most, because there's really nothing else to judge. You just like, here's like a typical kind of scenario. It's like Alex and his co-founder quit their jobs last month. So now they're full-time, and they just put together their pitch deck, but have also simultaneously built like a crappy prototype on AI, maybe put in front of like some users and seeing that there's a little bit of traction, starting maybe like some positive feedback or something quite light. So I like those kinds of teams, like just quit their jobs. That's important for us. We don't really support part-time founders when they're fund. And then now approaching us. So when it comes to the team, there's a lot of dimensions I like to look at in terms of skill set and so forth. But the most important one is I'm trying to understand whether this is a missionary team versus a mercenary team. And I think it bears some effort to actually explain like what each of them means. Let's start with mercenary. A mercenary team is basically founders who are just in it for the cash. Right. And by the way, there's nothing wrong about starting a company and becoming ultra rich from it. I actually think it's a great like example of how capitalism should work, like getting rewarded for your efforts. However, if it comes from a place of just like, all I care about is just maximizing money, that's it. I don't care about what I'm working on. It could be like a SaaS company, AI company, it could be a porn company, a casino. It doesn't matter. I just want to get my bag. Those are the least fun founders to work with, because they tend to pivot a lot. They might realize like that AI is hot this year. And then they see Web3 is hot next year and they'll pivot to that. And then something else. Then they just keep on like raising money, if they're good at fundraising, and sometimes they even find ways of pocketing that money through secondaries and so forth, right? It's just not great. Versus a missionary founder. A missionary founder is the founder that we all want to work with at Hustle Fund. This is someone that is not just doing this to make a ton of money, but has something quite personal at stake in terms of the success of this business and some change that they want to see in the world. I'll give you a small example of this. We have a recent investment into this company called Above Health. It's run by this great guy named Matt Truby. So what Matt does is he's creating like a whole sweat of AI diagnostics and actually a little bit of hardware, which is unusual for us, to help people with allergies, severe allergies and anaphylaxis to kind of pre-detect whether you're about to suffer from like a severe anaphylaxis reaction. That's like, you can't breathe. Like you need to have like an EpiPen like intervention, like very severe. So he spent a career building really, really amazing digital health startups. So he's got some credibility. But the reason why we are so inspired to invest is that he's got this really great young daughter who suffers from severe allergies. And he's building these devices largely for her, and realized that in the course of building this like diagnostic platform, it can serve so many other families with kids or adults with severe allergies too. So for someone like him, I think he's like the perfect missionary founder. What's at stake is actually not just money. Like he's already done pretty well in his career where, adding more money isn't probably going to change too much of his lifestyle. But he wants to save women, men, daughters, sons, just like his daughter, right? And how can you bet against someone who is trying to serve the person that they love most in their life? And that is really the high bar that I'm hoping to see in every single one of our founders.
That's a great story. And yeah, you really, as an early stage founder, you need to be ready to run through a wall to bring your vision to reality, and having that intrinsic motivation or the non-financial motivation is such a key part of that.
Yeah. And just even to end cap like this in like a personal story here, we started talking about Beat The GMAT. That company was not great. I mean, like it ended up being fine, but like from a venture backable perspective, like we bootstrapped it, like our exit wasn't like in the hundreds of millions, but it was like good. The thing that really kept me going, because this is, at the time, this is like 2005 when I really got started in this. I actually had like a job offer at Facebook in 2007. Like had I joined that, I would have been way wealthier from that outcome than even Beat The GMAT and all that stuff. But why I did it and why I stuck with it and why I made it through the hard times was because of our mission, which was to democratize access to graduate school resources so that people can achieve their dreams with higher education, right? And I told myself during the hardest moments, which is like, even if we have to shut down tomorrow, at least X million of people who went through the site were served, right? It was just like, I kept on repeating that to myself. It's like, even if like I failed tomorrow, like I run out of money, this is never going to be a failure because we were able to serve so many people. If I were building like a mercenary casino porn site Web3 company with some AI sprinkled in there, like, I don't think I could, this is just me. Like, this is no judgment to people who are building that kind of stuff. Like, you have your own values and I respect that. But like, I don't know if I could make it through the hard times because like the mission doesn't really resonate with me in any way. Yeah. So I'll sort of throw that in there as like also a lesson on values that I'm trying to apply to like the work at Hustle Fund too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the mission of a company is also a big part of the way that you recruit additional team members to come along on the mission. So I think you might have a slightly harder time getting additional missionaries to join your effort if you were building a Web3 based casino / OnlyFans product versus a product that's going to potentially save lives or, have that equivalent level of impact. So
first of all, that business idea probably will make a lot of money, what you just described. But second is, no, you're right. I mean, we were able to punch way above our weight when it came to hiring because we were able to also self-select for, it came from a very interesting way. They usually began as users of our website, found that they loved the community, and then that's when we began to recruit them. And we punched so far above our weight in terms of people because it was a good sale, right? Of just like, your values align with our values. Let's just do this together. And it's kind of amazing how history rhymes today. Almost all of our new hires at Hustle Fund, in fact, I think 100% in the last 5 years, came organically through the community as well. Like they were somehow like showing up to our events, part of Angel Squad and so forth, understood our values, and then they came aboard.
So you've probably evaluated at this point tens of thousands of founding teams. Have you noticed any trends or patterns in and around the composition of a founding team that tends to work the best at the early stages? And maybe as a additional layer to that, do you see that ideal composition changing today as a result of AI or other tech trends that are giving lean teams much more leverage?
Interesting question there, Alex. So I just checked the data as you're pulling this up, and we're just shy of 50,000 companies that we've reviewed since inception. We have actually a really clean database for how we track everything, including a lot of details like how much money you're trying to raise and at what valuation and so forth. So we have a fairly keen eye when it comes to trends. So at a high level, I guess some of the things that that we find to be good signals are actually related to hiring as well. So this is actually a little bit less about the first check, but more about like the second check when we double down. Like a great signal is I try as much as possible to be available to do the last round of interview to help people recruit. So if like founder Alex is like, hey, we found the person, they went through our process and we want just someone to help us like close this person, I like scheduling 5-10 minute meetings with those candidates and then just explaining like why Hustle Fund invested and answering their questions. It's really quick, but those 5 to 10 minutes give me pretty much everything I need to understand like who is this person that's actually joining the team. So like punching above their weight, like as founders and in terms of great hires is a really keen signal. The second thing too that we tend to notice about our best companies is that they're fairly thrifty and cheap. So we don't like teams that can just raise money just because they're good at fundraising. I actually think that excess of cash yields more correlation towards excessive spending that's unnecessary and overpaying of people and talent and partnerships. And that kind of, it's almost like a cocaine addiction. Like if it's just abundant around you and you get addicted to it, then you just feel like you need more and more and more cash. So we like teams that are fairly thrifty, those that are not, especially at the seed stage, let's say by the point, or post-seed, like they're burning less than 100,000 a month, which sounds like a lot, but at the later stages, that's sort of okay, pre to Series A. Or even like a lot less than that, like under $20,000 when they're like at the pre-seed stage. And then just really using those slugs wisely, like how they want to fire them into the right kinds of thoughtful, intentional experiments and so forth. So cheapness, I think, is a really big factor in that too. And then I think the last thing too is just comes back to that notion of hustle. So I defined hustle earlier as great execution meets high velocity. This is one of those things that's so difficult to define, but is largely felt. Do you just see within the portfolio people who seem to do 10 times more than the rest, right? So if they're focused on sales, they just tend to do 10 times more sales calls. If they're focusing on code output, they're producing 10 times more code and so forth. And you just sense it, right? It's really difficult to measure this because again, like your code output in a SaaS company might be very different from code output in building a next generation car. I don't know. Right, it could be very different kinds of like models. So all that is, I think, is like the overriding principle. And last point around AI. So 2 trends. One is that founders are asking for less money now. This is very clear in our data that the amount of money that they're asking for at the pre-seed stage is actually starting to go down. And as AI is allowing people to get started cheaper and scale up cheaper, I think it's starting to be reflected in how much money that people are asking to raise. And this is good for founders. That means that they're a little bit less diluted in the beginning of their raise with early investors. And then I think just focusing on scale too. I'm astounded just watching our portfolio leverage AI tools in ways where it seems like the throughput of a given engineer is almost 10 times more than even 2 years ago. Just like all these like cool code tools like Devin and Cognition and like Copilots and so forth. I'm seeing like these developers like running like a dozen agents simultaneously as they're developing right now. So that I think is so cool, right? To see almost like individual contributor being sort of managers of AI agents. And that I think is going to be such a neat mental model and way to build in the future.
Yeah, you definitely get the feeling that what we're seeing with the earliest stage startups is ultimately how the majority of companies are going to run in the future. And we're just getting like a glimpse into what the future is going to look like because these startups are a little strapped for cash and that you're optimizing for that hustle or that scrappiness. You often hear that phrase, more startups die of indigestion and starvation. And I think that is very true from our experiences at Air CFO. So yeah, it is wild what some of these early stage companies are able to do, giving themselves additional leverage using AI. Do you think that the companies that you are investing in today who are built with AI integrated into their core, do you think they're going to follow different journeys as startups, like in terms of their funding progression and things like that, than companies have in the past? And what do you think that'll look like?
There's a hope and I think a reality. So like the hope for me is there's a term that got popular in 2025 called seed strapping. It's the idea that founders Alex and Eric, they raised maybe some early capital, let's call it even up to like $1 million, enough for them to get started, enough for them to put the infrastructure in place for the business. And then AI enablement and all this stuff just allows them to get really profitable really quick. And they can sort of just like almost bootstrap a really fast growth from there on out. Right. And we've seen this happen a few times already within our portfolio. And I think I was a really stronger believer of this in the beginning of this year that, oh man, this is like the future. But then I think there's a different kind of reality that ultimately settles, which is every decade or so, we get this new technology that can reshape the way that we work. I'll give you like paint you a picture back in 2005, actually. So in 2005, I was able to get a job, even though like my mom says I'm too dumb. So shows her what she knows, right? Yeah. So I was working at this great company called Intuit. I was able to get a rotational leadership program. Eventually became a product manager there for about 3.5 years. Great people. And back in 2005, I was sitting in a cubicle. I had a corded phone, like a phone line on my desk with like the headset, you know. I did have a laptop, a Dell laptop, I think, but it was traditional. Like most people actually left their laptops at work. So around 5, no later than 6, office cleared out. This is like in Mountain View, California, like it's still Silicon Valley. People left their laptops at work. And then it was considered super rude to send an email at night, right? Like that's just it. Okay. So this is already a multi-billion-dollar company at this point. All right. And that was how they were working. Obviously, I think Intuit is quite different now. So these technologies come, 2007, iPhone comes out. Right. And then like a whole mobile era of connectivity, like Web 2 comes out and like all sorts of like social networks that like kind of put people like online like chronically. COVID, I think, was a really big one for just being like this idea that there's no work-life barrier anymore. You're expected to be on all the time. So I think businesses, founders, everyone just have a way of adopting new technology and just like changing the bar of what is acceptable throughput for that given individual at a much higher level each time. So we're kind of interested in this really interesting dip where like AI is kind of doing a lot for us in some companies, and you can do a lot more with fewer people, but the money is still there. So if you just hire really aggressively, but still have an incredibly high like bar for throughput for each individuals, then theoretically you can grow really fast. Right. So I thought in the beginning of this year, like maybe this company is going to be leaner and smaller, and a good chunk of them will stay that way. And it's right for them. But I also do think that there's going to be always like this war for talent eventually, where it's just like the bar is now way high. And then you're expected to know how to use all these AI tools. And then let's just like continue our screaming path down to massive growth. Right. And that tends to be the more historically validated pattern that I'm going to guess we're going to start to see, especially in 2026.
So where would you expect, not to, I won't hold you to this forecast for the future because it's anyone's guess where we're heading with all this, but I think I agree with you that the companies will continue to spend money. It will become a bit of an arms race. Where do you think that money will go to, though, if it's not adding headcount at the same rate that seed to Series A stage companies may have layered on headcount previously? Or do you think it will be the same? You think companies will be the same size? They'll just be AI powered, so they'll be moving 2 to 10x faster?
Something that I heard from Peter Thiel, the famous investor, was so disturbing to me, but has turned out to be really true. Now, this is like kind of during the pre-COVID era, during that boom. He said, the vast majority of the money that invests into startups goes into real estate. So what I mean by that is just like when San Francisco was booming, like those rents were not cheap. Like that was like among like one of the largest expenses that people are taking. Or even like if you're paying for a gazillion dollars for that employee, they're also using a big chunk of that to fund their rental property or their house or something in the Bay Area or wherever they are, right? Like just like housing and office space are just extraordinarily expensive, right? And it was shocking to me to sort of think that, wow, like venture capital dollars really does underwrite all this stuff. Not the majority of it, but like a good chunk of it, right? I don't know where I land with real estate. I'm quite like focusing on that kind of thing. But I do think that great talent, there's always going to be like a good war for like the very best. And like the manifestation of that is like some of the, what I consider to be kind of foolish moves that Meta has done and like signing $100 million contracts with given like AI people. I find that kind of crazy and actually like an indicator that we are maybe at the peak of a bubble. If like you're getting $100 million contract, that's like signing Messi for like 1 year at like, in his prime, like at, like Manchester City or something like that. I don't think he ever played there. So it's wild, right? Like that's like kind of where we're at. So like a lot of money, I think, funnels into great teams constructing that kind of stuff. Maybe like there's going to be a version where cash also gets dedicated to AI throughput. So if you're really scaled and need to like build your own like GPUs and data centers or like its own like independent like energy and all that stuff, like if you're Oracle or something like that, I think a ton of money, hundreds of billions are going to go into things like that. For startups, maybe that's going to be formed of like, just different kinds of SaaS subscriptions that allow you to control like tens of thousands of AI agents that are helping you to build stuff. Right. It's just a different kind of definition of a workforce at that point. It's labor, but maybe it's not quite human labor at that point. Those are all my best guesses. I'm going to just, even as it's leaving my mouth talking to you, Alex, a lot of this is going to age like milk.
No, I mean, I think that those are as far as we could predict based on what's happening today. I think those are very strong potential futures that could happen. I could see a world where we have smaller teams, but companies are spending much more on each team member, both because of the war for talent and because of the AI tooling that they arm each individual engineer with. Maybe you spend an extra $5,000 a month on an AI coding solution that's sort of like a junior engineer or an army of junior engineers for a senior level person. And yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of money spent on building high performing teams because it's becoming clear that like within the engineering discipline, some people are worth like a multiple above, maybe not $100 million, but I'm sure there's many engineers out there who are worth like 5x your normal engineer. And I don't know how exactly you suss that out as a hiring manager or how you justify that, but feels like the way things are going, especially when people can give themselves the kind of leverage that they can with AI.
I don't have a reaction to that other than I'm just nodding and saying like, it's a little bit disturbing to me as well.
The finance part of my brain, it makes me short circuit a little bit, but I guess when you're throwing off tens of billions of dollars a quarter like Meta is, you can afford to go on a shopping spree every now and then, buy some shiny new toys. So we're coming up on time here. I'd love to ask one more question and then see if you have any other sage wisdom you want to impart on our audience before we wrap. You recently shared a post about taste as a defensible moat for early stage startups. I generally agree with this thesis, but in the early stages, how do you make a judgment about whether a founding team has differentiated taste, especially if it's in an industry that you might not be like super tapped into?
This is the reason why I don't do a lot of consumer investing. Like if you were to ask me like, go find the next TikTok or Snap or something like that, I don't think I have any capability of doing that, even though like I was a product manager at Meta like years ago and so forth, like working on consumer stuff, like I never really understood it. But then on occasion, you do meet these investors or founders who are passionate about studying things like that in the consumer space. When I said taste, I think I was talking more about like the consumer part of it. And they can just put together lots of different kinds of lived experiences, data, whatever, to come up with something that like hasn't been done before, and find that there's a real audience behind it. So what I find troublesome is that taste, when you have it, is amazing, right? I mean, like if you have good taste, like you can be easily a hit maker in finding all sorts of great companies, especially in the consumer space, because like venture capital is not an industry that generally has a lot of good taste, right? Like, I mean, let's look at me right now. I mean, this is my best outfit right now. It's just like some like crappy t-shirt and I'm wearing like sweatpants right now. All right. Like, so that's on the fashion fit taste side of it. But, and this is why I actually really like B2B software is not to say that you don't find B2B founders with great taste. They're sure out there, but sales cycles are something that I feel like is more of like a science. Right. Like if you're solving like a really good problem, then it's more of just like a problem of like, how do you set up the machine so you're generating a lot of leads, like funneling it down to the right kinds of parties that are a good fit for you, getting them to pay and then getting them to retain, and just doing that over and over and over again. I like that kind of stuff because it's a little bit less about Eric's personal taste and more about just like, how do we design the machine to do that kind of thing? Right. So I guess the last comment I'll make about taste is just, this is kind of where you find the most exciting contrarian and right views. So I think Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, one of those guys said, like, if you want to make a lot of money in business, you have to be both contrarian and right. We sort of talked about this contrarian and right kind of thing earlier. And having good taste is one of those like exciting things where like I often see things that I just don't understand, like that Gen Z are doing, and it ends up blowing up like within like a month or two into something that's like ridiculously huge that everyone's using. So those are often like the best stories to tell if you get involved in those kinds of things. But I really don't have any clue of how to guide people towards like people with good taste and so forth, because I just don't have.
I mean, that looks like a nice, comfy T-shirt that you've got on there. So you might be selling yourself a little bit short on the fashion side. But tying it back to where we kind of started this conversation, I feel like a pretty strong signal of a founder's taste is just like their ability to tell a compelling story that resonates with a passionate group of individuals out there who might end up being like the early adopters of, even if it's like a B2B software platform. I think if you have someone who has a differentiated point of view on the world and they're able to rally an audience around their cause in the early stages of building a product, that feels to me like it could be like an indicator that they have a bit of taste that is not necessarily hasn't manifested into like a product in the world, but could end up becoming something that's successful. So yeah, your comment at the beginning just made me think about that a little bit. I've been thinking a lot about taste in B2B software because we've been playing around a lot with vibe coding, and I'm realizing that like it's so important to understand or to have a feel for what not to build when you can build literally anything. And I think that feeds into taste quite a bit as well. But sorry, that was a little bit of a detour there. I know that we're at the top of the hour here. I'm sure you've got a busy day ahead of you out there on the West Coast. So I'd love to wrap up by just asking you, are there any other bits of advice that you'd give to a first time founder that, even if it's pointing them towards a specific set of resources on the Hustle Fund's website, or just other little nuggets that have really stood out to you over the years as being those practices that separate the successful founders from the less successful ones?
I'll share a piece of advice that probably you or your audience are not expecting here, but it's to marry well. So I was very lucky in that I met my wife in the very first day of college. I had to wait for her to break up with her boyfriend, but we've been together for 22 years now, 2 kids, married for, I don't know, a long time. I just stopped keeping count. So the thing about marrying well was just like, when I met her, it became very clear to me that she was someone that possessed incredible values, really believed in me, and also was ambitious as hell. And what I have found over the time in the 5 companies I've created over time, and being a founder is an exercise of overcoming self-doubt constantly, sabotaging voices, imposter syndrome. Like, it's just screaming at you every day. And then over time, you learn to live with it, but it doesn't make it easier. It's just like having someone that I know completely has my back, whom I respect, and she's an incredible founder herself too. The big thing I've gotten out of this relationship as a founder is that she always challenges me to 100x my vision. When I say, like, I want to get to X number of users or Y number of like things in this other metric, she's like, why are you dreaming so small? Like, dream way bigger, right? And that has always been like almost like this tailwind behind me of like, wow, someone that like really believes and sees it even before I can see it in myself too. So I don't believe that everyone needs to get married or have kids or anything like that. Like, it's, you got to do you, but having at least a partner in life that like completely has your back, it could be even your co-founder, that just makes life more joyous. And when you can live like a fairly joyful life, you bring your best self to work. And when you bring your best self to work, you're setting yourself up to have the best outcomes too. So don't neglect the dating, everyone.
That is not something that I necessarily expected to hear from you, but I do think that is really great advice. And in general, like finding ways to bring that joy, like develop that internal joy, and then having that manifest in building a company is, I mean, it's a great way to get you through the ups and downs that are plentiful when you're trying to get an early stage startup off the ground. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. Well, with that, I think that's a really great place to wrap. So Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. Came with some really great bits of wisdom, and there's so much more on the Hustle Fund website. So definitely encourage everyone to hop in and check that out. It's a great complement to some of the stuff that we're putting together here at Air CFO to help founders succeed in their fundraise process. And yeah, I'm really excited to share this episode with the startup community. I think founders are going to take a ton away from it. So yeah, thank you so much.
Alex, thank you so much. Really appreciate this opportunity, and also appreciate what you're doing to put stories like this out there too. So thanks for all that you do.